Congresswoman, thanks for being with us, and I want to ask you, obviously, about what's happening on the Hill right now. But if I can first, given this news from the Secretary Pete Hegseth, are we at war with the drug cartels, and does the President of the United States have the right, as he believes he did on September 15th, to take action against drug cartels like this?
Hey, Chris, good to be with you. Look, we need more information. We have got a system of checks and balances that was established 250 years ago by our forefathers, and I do believe that when we declare war, that Congress is the one that needs to have the authority and should be doing so. I think the pertinent committees of jurisdiction need far more information and need to be delving into this, and I am happy in these tense times to know it is bipartisan concern.
So let me ask you about what's happening right now. Where do negotiations stand right now? Are there conversations taking place that you know about? Tell us where things stand.
Well, I went home for 36 hours for the Yom Kippur observances because we knew that there would not be. I returned, so I would be here this weekend with my leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and Democrats are willing and want to go to a table and have bipartisan discussions. On the House side, that doesn't seem to be happening. The Senate is voting right now. I don't think there have been discussions at the leadership level about how we reach a compromise, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I do know that individual senators have been talking among themselves, and we'll see where this vote ends up. But, you know, there's been no good faith effort. The leaders of Senator Schumer and Leader Jeffries have been asking for bipartisan meetings for 2 months. The first one happened this week. And unfortunately, it was the first meeting since the president took office in January that happened that included the two Democratic leaders. I think it's very important. I think the issues matter. I think people, besides being very worried about health care and the cost of it, which is very real right now, as people are having premiums, what their premiums would be mailed to them right now, and the exchange opens in a month and the tax credits expire at the end of December. But we also need guardrails. We need to have real, people need to assure us that the money that is authorized and appropriated is going to be spent in the way and will be spent if we pass it.
So I just want to be clear, because we've heard both leaders, Thune and Johnson, say, look, let's get the government back up and running, and then we will talk about health care. Then we will have negotiations. Do you trust them to do that?
I think what you're hearing is because there have not been discussions that have had serious inclusion of Democrats in them, people are not assured that those real health care discussions will happen, which is why you're seeing where we are right now.
So you posted on social media that you met with FAA workers in your district. As you said, you were just home. And I wonder what you're hearing from folks. And when you talk about the possibility of compromise, are you telling them, here's what we think we can do to get this done?
So, look, I'm not going to lie to you. We were scheduled to meet with TSA workers, and also the union itself had ordered lunch to give to the workers that are now working without pay, and the TSA workers were not allowed to pick up lunches on airport property in uniform, and were warned that if they talked to us, there would be serious consequences. So I want to make it really clear, I'm not going to hurt anybody. But FAA did approve us to meet with the air traffic controllers. And look, they are tired of being a political ping pong ball. They understand the issues that are being fought for. They did not complain about those issues. They know people that are in their neighborhoods are being impacted. But they're worried about, these are some of the highest stress jobs in the country, and they're worried about their mortgage payments, they're worried about the car payments, they're worried about what's going to happen to the credit worker. The more seasoned workers have been through this once, so they knew to save money. The younger ones that are new are scared. was a really candid conversation. And they're not angry at anybody, they're angry at everybody. Look, I've got a bill that would pay unemployment benefits to government workers if they get caught in this. But I have a lot of empathy for these workers that are caught in the middle.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and good luck as this moves forward.